much sound. The important point here is that whatever actions are taking place on the moon, we should not be able to hear any sound. Imagine if you were a moon dweller and saw this strange-looking craft descend towards the moon with its rockets lit up, but it was all in total silence. Well, at least that's what we would expect, according to the science of the glass bell jar. Of course we imagine that any moon dwellers would have to use sign language. The skeptics have identified actions by the astronauts in which a distinct sound can be clearly heard, which shouldn't be possible if they are really on the moon. We will start with a video by Daniela from the Apollo 16 mission. The astronaut is shown lifting and closing a lid on a container on the lunar rover, and there is a distinct sound. Later in the video, you can even hear the astronaut's footsteps as he shuffles in the lunar dust. Similarly in the video from Street Cap 1, in which the hammer sound is clearly audible.
Good.
On the moon, with no medium to transit the sound, then it would not be possible to hear any sound. The question of sound is also covered exhaustively by Jet Windsor. He looks in detail at the question of sound being heard in the Apollo mission videos and the acknowledgement of this by NASA.
Don't wear your hand out.
The incident of the hammer blow is mentioned in the transcript in the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal. The contorted answer from NASA is that the sound was transmitted through the astronaut's gloves into his suit through the oxygen in his suit and picked up by the internal microphone. The Apollo Lunar Surface Journal states this: "What seems likely is that, when Gene hit the rock, the hammer rebounds against the palm of the pressurized glove, creating a sound wave in the suit loud enough to be picked up by the microphone at Gene's lips. In brief, the suit acts like a drum." The explanation by NASA is challenged by Windsor, who draws parallels with the International Space Station videos, in which this transfer of sound through their spacesuits does not appear to happen when the astronauts work outside in space. He also states that the sound heard is not what you would expect if the spacesuit was acting like a drum, but is the clear, distinct metallic sound of a hammer striking the metal pole of the flagstaff. He also identifies what seems to be a tactic admission by NASA that something was amiss. This relates to a web page shown at 553 in the section Lunar Science for Kids, which was intended to educate children about the fact that there was no sound possible in the vacuum on the moon. It was placed on the NASA website in 2009, and it states, "Sound needs something to travel through to get from one place to another. On the moon, since there is no air, sound cannot travel through the surface, so there is no sound on the surface of the moon. When the astronauts were out on the moon's surface, they could only talk to each other and to mission control by using their radios in their air-inflated helmets. Even when the astronauts in the photo on the right hit a metal tube into the ground with a hammer, no sound was made. Unfortunately for NASA, the photograph shown was the very action of hammering in the flagpole, which Jet Windsor has identified as causing this sound. In August 2011, the page suddenly disappeared, presumably removed by NASA, but with no explanation. One really needs to ponder why. NASA's statement that the astronaut's spacesuit acted like a sound drum, even if that is plausible, is disproved by Windsor. He identifies a significant incident in the Apollo 15 video footage as astronaut James Irwin throws a metal band into the air, which hits the lunar module and makes a distinct sound. This act totally negates the reasoning given by NASA for hearing the hammer blows because the spacesuit acted like a drum, as in this case there is no contact between the astronaut and the source of the sound. It is food for thought that apart from the NASA explanation of the sound being caused by the spacesuit acting as a drum, I cannot trace any other believer willing to contribute to the discussion of sounds heard on the moon. I find this simple fact quite significant and possibly very telling.
Calling planet Earth. I wish my horse had the speed of your tongue.
William Shakespeare, Much Ado About Nothing. This portion of the video series deals with the vital communication between Mission Control in Houston and the astronauts in deep space. Let us first have a look at how Mission Control communicated with the astronauts. This is summarized in a NASA video published in 1970. Although it specifically relates to Apollo 8, the systems are just the same for all Apollo missions. Communication over these very large distances does pose some significant problems. It is not as easy as talking to your neighbor over the garden fence. Not that my neighbor is all that easy to talk to. Why a delay? No doubt you have often noticed on television when the studio is talking to a reporter on an outside broadcast that there is a delay before the outside broadcaster responds to a question from the studio. The outside broadcaster knows this will happen, and they have a habit to nod their heads while waiting to receive the studio voice. This is because the radio waves that are used for transmission via satellites take time to reach the communication satellite, which is in orbit at a height between 10 miles, polar using radio waves, and 23,000 miles, equatorial using microwaves, above the Earth. This delay effect also applies when Earth-based microwave communications are being used, albeit a shorter delay. The transmission of the radio waves travels at the speed of light, that is an incredible 186,500 miles per second, and an amazing 7.5 times around the globe in 1 second. Therefore, a radio signal from the Earth to the Moon would take about 1.3 seconds to cover the 240,000-mile distance. This means that, for an example, the question by the astronaut on the Moon would take about 1.3 seconds to reach Mission Control on Earth. Mission Control would have to wait to hear the full context of the message sent, the message to be diagnosed by the human brain, then time to formulate an answer before sending back their reply. This would take at least 3 seconds for a simple message, but more likely about 4 seconds for a message that requires a thinking reply. This is simple, unalterable physics, and is observed each time we watch the television news outside broadcasts.
Transmission delay from the Moon.
Now, the observable delay for the listener depends upon where the audio recording was made, that is, at which side of the conversation. For example, assume that we are recording the conversation at the Mission Control Center in Houston, and Houston speaks first to the astronauts on the Moon. We should then see this pattern. Houston sends message to astronaut on Moon. About 3 seconds delay before receiving reply from astronaut. Houston hears astronaut reply. No real delay, just thinking time. Houston messages back. About 3 seconds delay before receiving reply from astronaut. Houston hears astronaut reply. No real delay, just thinking time. Houston messages back, and so on. You can see that we only expect to see a delay between Houston speaking and the astronaut replying, and this must be a minimum of about 3 seconds. There needs to be no delay, only thinking time from hearing the astronaut's reply and Houston speaking again. I hope that clears things up a little. However, the skeptics contend that on some Apollo videos, you will find that there is no appropriate delay between the astronauts on the Moon and Mission Control on Earth to account for the Moon's distance. It appears as though the astronauts and Houston are communicating faster than the speed of light. The skeptics also suggest that it could be that the astronauts are not actually on the Moon, but simply in low Earth orbit when a much less delay would be expected. In some videos, there even appears to be no perceivable delay. The skeptics maintain that NASA simply forgot about the obvious and easily discoverable discrepancy. We will now let our believer, Brant Watson, give his explanation. He does state in this video the correct transmission delay and also explains an insufficient delay often misrepresented by the skeptics as being an anomaly. The skeptics conclude that Neil Armstrong was replying to Mission Control and that didn't leave enough time delay, but Brant satisfactorily clarifies that anomaly. However, he did not continue to cover the next part of that conversation, in which the audio delay is insufficient, as we shall see below. The believers also state that most of the Apollo videos and audios that you can find online are copies which have often been edited to reduce the video length so that the edited versions do not reflect the delays correctly. They maintain that in the original broadcasts you will find dependable, unedited audio. I have unsuccessfully tried to identify video or audio which I can definitely state to be original and unedited. You can access what one would assume are original Apollo audio files on the NASA website, but the probability is that the majority have indeed been edited by NASA. Listening to many of these NASA versions of the audio broadcasts, then I can confirm that there appears to be the expected delay of about 3 seconds between each question and the answer from Mission Control's standpoint. However, the skeptics point out that this is a NASA-controlled website and it cannot be entirely trusted to be an unadulterated media. It is also well known that NASA have edited and supposedly enhanced the video to improve the quality, so the skeptics question, did they take this opportunity to do more than this after they realized the mistakes that they had made in the originals? There is one interesting comparison made on the following websites, authorized by someone who refers to themselves as Northern Truth Seeker, which I invite you to visit. Note that he makes the error of assuming that the first reply from Columbia is too short, but Brant Watson already cleared this suggested anomaly up in his video. I will cover the information from Northern Truth Seeker's submission in detail. A section from Northern Truth Seeker's website describes the delay problem. We have this in the audio recordings. Columbia, this is Houston, AOS, over. 1.0 second pause. Houston, Columbia. The pause ought to be 2.51 seconds minimum. That's 1.25 seconds for the message to go out and 1.258 seconds for the message to come back if the astronaut replied instantly. If both Houston and Columbia spoke instantly, and both continually spoke without interrupting each other, you would see a pattern if recorded on Earth like this because of time delays. CH. A pause of 1.0 seconds would be a distance between Earth and Columbia of about 195,900 miles, or 42% of the distance to the Moon and back. Had Columbia begun her reply in order for the message to arrive at the time recorded in this record, she would have had to start speaking when Houston was giving Columbia. But adequate and standard practice is to wait until the over. When you listen to the record, it sounds like a natural conversation with everybody saying over at the end to punctuate the communication, wait for the other party to speak. But the pattern continues. I guess you're about the only person around here that doesn't have TV coverage of the scene. 1.0 second pause. That's alright, I don't mind a bit. In order for That's Alright to arrive on Earth 2.5 seconds after transmission, Columbia would have had to utter it when Houston was speaking the word doesn't. It would have been like this at the Columbia end. I guess you're about the only person around here that does. That's alright, I don't mind a bit. Talk about completing each other's sentences. But what really attracted my attention is that the brand new and refurbished NASA video of the same situation, the pauses are now the right length. I guess you're the only person around here that doesn't have TV coverage of the scene. 3.37 second pause. That's alright, I don't mind a bit. More than that, there is an echo artifact stuck in the middle in between scene and that's alright. It's an echo of the scene. It arrives at a perfect 2.62 seconds after being uttered, exactly the time it would take to moon bounce. It's perfect. Here is the refurbished audio showing the end of the sentence and the echoed word scene. The problem is that neither the pause nor the echo in the original version was there. The proper signature delay is only there in the new and improved version. What's clear is if I am indeed working with the original audio footage, is that the original recording could not possibly have been a live conversation between the Earth and the Moon. Physics defies it. You cannot travel faster than the speed of light with a radio pack, and these recordings clearly show communication with a delay that is 42% the value it should be. And it is clear that the new and improved version has delays that are just right to sound as though they were between the Earth and the Moon, complete with a little moon reflection to prove that they were exactly that distance away, along with a human pause before replying. Of course, the easiest explanation is that I simply got hold of a piece of audio which had all of the silence edited out, trimmed off for presentation. It is normal practice and hardly a conspiracy, but the video on YouTube is labeled as original rendering, and it seems that way in the fine grain of the audio. The static is continuous, there are no abrupt transmissions, and the human conversation has a very natural rhythm, cadence.
Seeing is believing.
Each substance of a grief hath 20 shadows. William Shakespeare, Richard II. Where do we start with this one? I think that there is enough debate over the photographs and videos taken on the moon to fill several books, let alone one video. It is a seemingly endless debate of claim and counterclaim. We are faced with a whole bunch of supposed anomalies in many areas, from the cameras used and film used, duplicate backgrounds, inconsistent shadows, brightly lit shade, strange-looking suns. You name it, it has been questioned and debated, and leaves us spoilt for choice. However, I will attempt as best as I can to bring some order out of this morass of confusion.
Photographs and videos.
During the Apollo project, it is estimated that over 32,000 photographs were taken as a record of the project. The moon photographs and videos are perhaps one of the most important pieces of evidence presented by NASA to demonstrate that they did go to the moon, and paradoxically, one of the major pieces of evidence presented by the skeptics to doubt that they did. NASA states that the astronauts took more than 6,000 photographs on the moon to record the historic Apollo moon missions. You can see most of the photographs in this handy Flickr page above. Count them if you wish, but according to NASA, there are about 6,000 taken by the Apollo astronauts on the moon. The skeptics claim that the photographs and videos show many anomalies, which they suggest that the photography was made on a special set constructed here on Earth. They also claim that there are indisputable evidence to show that some, if not many, of the photographs have been altered from the originals. Again, we return to the question of what is original and what is not. One of the problems that we are faced with is that the photographs were taken on film long before the days of digital cameras, and all of what you see on the NASA website are scans of the original photos. In this scanning process, all manner of strange anomalies could have been introduced. We will cover one of these later when we discuss the ubiquitous crosshair anomaly. But let us be clear about one thing from the very start. If it can be shown that NASA did fake some or all of the photographs on the moon, it does not necessarily follow that the moon landings never occurred. There may be several other valid reasons why they might do this. It was clearly important that NASA had to show visible evidence that they had reached the moon, rather than just stating that they had landed on the moon in some news announcement. Therefore, producing photographs and videos was a very essential part of the missions, fake or not. Perhaps NASA was concerned that the photographic film may be affected by radiation and produce poor or even no results. In consequence, they could have produced fake photographs beforehand just in case the photography on the moon didn't work, and who knows, perhaps it didn't. We do know that they did have convincingly realistic moon sets on Earth, which they created specifically for astronaut training purposes. These studio sets would have enabled NASA to fake some or even all of the photographic evidence if they had so wished. The video evidence is somewhat different in that, according to NASA, it was supposedly used immediately in live broadcasts to show the first steps on the moon, although this live broadcast is doubted by many. NASA holds a vast library of information from the Apollo missions, which are all available to download directly from the NASA website. This information database includes full details of the missions, photographs, videos, mission reports, scientific reports, flight plans, press releases, moon rocks collected, and much more. The NASA archive on the Apollo's project is a vast treasure trove of original NASA materials and a rich source for our skeptics and believers alike. Our skeptics may have questions regarding this information, and many have requested further elaboration and clarification from NASA concerning the anomalies that they have contended existed in the record. The response from NASA, claim the skeptics, has not always been satisfactory.
Typical NASA responses.
The skeptics are given more fuel for their fire in that NASA seemingly does not want to engage in the debate to explain why there appears to be so many anomalies in their photographs and videos. The late Brian Welsh, former NASA Director of Media Services, provides a typical NASA response. Obviously, I think that pseudoscientific nitpicky claptrap had the game. I don't see why we should spend even a moment trying to judge that. Not a very edifying nor scientific reply to please our skeptics. Also shown in the Fox News program called Conspiracy Theory, Did We Land on the Moon?, which claimed that the Apollo moon landings may have been faked. Moon hoax proponents on the show argued that NASA's 1960s technology was adequate to accomplish a moon landing and that the US government, determined to beat Russia in the space race, faked the whole thing. Brian Welsh stated, "The exact answer to the question is, I don't really know and haven't been bothered to go and find out. The reason is that this is 30-year-old stuff. I don't understand why we should spend the time to prove to people why we went to the moon. In fact of matters, we did go to the moon." Again, not a very elucidated or professional answer to a well-formulated presentation of the evidence of specific anomalies in the NASA account of the Apollo project, but regrettably, that has tended to be a typical response from NASA. The phone calls made to NASA increased subsequently in 2001 after the Fox television program. NASA spokesman Bob Jacob commented, "This is a tough position to be in. Conspiracy theories have been around for a long while, but how does NASA engage in debunking something that shouldn't have to be debunked? Every time people come across something on the internet or see something on TV, we start getting calls. These were bad conclusions based on bad science, but they were presented in a form that was recognizable as a documentary. There was never any attempt to show a fair examination of the facts, and that just kind of created a new swell of interest in the conspiracy theories." NASA further shot itself in the foot in 2002 when they agreed to pay Texas aerospace engineer, the author James Oberg, US $15,000 to write a book to set the record straight, and then promptly canceled it. Oberg then commented, "I was just going to bring out more of the amazing truths about our space activities, talk to the people involved, and show the public how they can think for themselves and check these things out that they hear. NASA said the publicity had just gotten too distracting, and I also suspect that they were afraid that Congress would get on their case about spending the money or paying attention to the silliness like this. I was dismayed and I was disappointed. But the fact is, there are anomalies in the photographs that do need to be answered if NASA wants to retain its credibility. It is all too easy to simply dismiss these anomalies as claptrap and 30-year-old stuff that's not worthy of discussion. NASA's continual attempts to sidestep the issue does nothing for its credibility, and it only makes the skeptics even more super skeptical. We are not talking about just one or a few photographs that the skeptics claim to show anomalies, but literally hundreds upon hundreds of photographs in which anomalies are being suggested. The anomalies claimed range from inconsistent shadow angles, repeated background scenario at supposedly entirely different locations, inconsistent positioning between photographs of the same scene, missing crosshairs, Earth shown and its incorrect phase and size, fake-looking sun reflections, inconsistent evidence between still shots and videos supposedly taken at the same time, and a myriad more. We examine many of these claims in this video.
Cameras used on the moon.
First of all, we need to focus on the equipment used to take photographs and video on the moon. Remember, we are back in the period between 1969 and 1972. These were the days of flower power, free love, unidentified flying objects, Polaroid cameras, and photographic film long before the digital cameras and the internet. I was there at the time, but somehow missed the free love bit. We had to wait until 1975 to see the first digital camera, and 1993 before most of us could affordably get our hands on one. We didn't get our keyboards on a usable internet until 1991. The fact that the cameras used on the moon were not digital, but used photographic film is something we will discuss later. The cameras supplied were made by the company of Victor Hasselblad AB, which is a Swedish manufacturer, and were constructed to NASA specifications. Several different types of cameras were taken to the moon to suit the type of still photography and video tasks. There are one or two more aspects of the cameras used on the surface of the moon that differ from what you might expect and need to be highlighted so that you can fully understand some of what follows. The astronauts needed to wear special spacesuits to be able to survive in the hostile climate while bobbing around on the surface of the moon. They also needed to have both hands free to carry out specific tasks related to planned scientific experiments. The camera was therefore fixed hands-free into a special retainer attached on the astronaut's chest, although it could be unclipped and handheld if necessary. These factors had three major consequences for photography on the moon in the way the cameras could be operated. Firstly, the astronauts' helmets made it impossible for them to look down into a viewfinder to frame the shot and adjust the focus, so NASA did away with the viewfinder as it would only add weight and would have served no useful purpose. Secondly, and another consequence of not being able to look down at the camera, meant that the astronauts could not see any buttons on the camera, so that the buttons to operate the camera were placed underneath at the front of the camera. Thirdly, the spacesuits had to be pressurized with about 5 psi, otherwise the astronauts' blood would boil and they would turn into jelly and quickly die. The pressurized gloves that the astronauts needed to wear meant that it was very difficult to have a fine touch, so the buttons on the camera were made extra large. Imagine typing your next email while wearing heavy-duty gardening gloves and you'll get the idea. Hasselblad made all of the design adjustments to their standard 500 EL design camera. The Hasselblad cameras had an electric motor which largely automated the picture-taking process. The astronauts needed only to set the distance, lens aperture, focus, and shutter speed. I say only, but wearing gardening gloves and with your head in a fishbowl, it is not such an easy task. Once the release button was pressed, the camera exposed the film, wound onto the next frame, and tensioned the shutter. The final design adjustment at the Hasselblad camera was the fitting of a Resua plate. The Resua plate was made of glass and was fitted to the back of the camera body extremely close to the film plane. The plate was then engraved with a number of crosshairs to form a grid. The intersections were 10 mm apart and actually calibrated to a tolerance of 0.002 mm. Except for the central cross, each of the four arms of each cross was 1 mm long and 0.02 mm wide. The crosses are recorded on every exposed frame, supposedly providing a means of determining angular distances between objects in the field of view and giving our skeptics more cause for complaint, as you will see. Finally, the outer surface of the 500 EL data camera was colored silver to help minimize more uniform internal temperatures in the ultraviolet extremes of heat and cold encountered on the lunar surface. Lubricants used in the camera mechanisms had to either be eliminated or replaced because conventional lubricants would immediately boil off in the vacuum of space and could potentially condense on the optical surfaces of the lenses, Resua plate, and film.
Photographic film.
2 film magazines for the lunar surface Hasselblad 500 EL data camera were carried for use on the moon's surface. 33 rolls of the same film types as used on the earlier missions were carried on the Apollo 11 mission. The film used for Apollo 11 was loaded and, according to NASA, several test shots were exposed prior to the flight. When the film magazines were returned for processing after the mission, the test shots were cut off and processed first. These were then compared against accurate color charts to ensure that there would be no defect in processing the remainder of the film and that colors would be most accurate. Each film magazine would typically yield 160 color and 200 black and white pictures on a special film. Did I say special film? Well, we will discuss that later. In the meantime, Kodak was asked by NASA to develop thin new films with special emulsions. The film magazine was finished in the same silver color as the camera body. Each magazine was fitted with a tether ring to which a cord was attached that permitted the entire camera to be lowered from the lunar module cabin down to the astronaut on the surface using a clothesline-like arrangement. The exposed film magazines were lifted from the surface back to the lunar lander in the same manner. The camera and lenses were left behind and still rest eternally on the moon's surface at the various Apollo locations, much to the delight of many optimistic eBayers.